when you're not talking. We will unmute you when it's your turn to ask a question. If you need to mute yourself, the mute is located in the lower left-hand corner of the screen. We will provide video and audio files after the call, but feel free to record anything you wish. If you haven't yet, please open the chat box, and that'll be our order of questions. If you have a question, please enter your name and affiliation in the chat box and wait to be called on. With that, we're joined by Orioles Executive Vice President and General Manager Mike Elias. We'll start with a statement from Mike, and then we'll take questions. Mike?
Hi, good evening, everybody. We're approaching the start of the resumption of the baseball season, and obviously that's great news, for everyone in our organization, everyone in our business, everyone who loves baseball. So it's really fun to join you tonight under the circumstances with our spring training 2.0 right around the corner. We have been, our entire organization, not just baseball operations, but ballpark operations. Everyone across every corner of the organization has been working really tirelessly the last few weeks and days to get us extra prepared for players returning, for activity returning to Camden Yards. Obviously this is going to be unlike anything that any of us has ever experienced. But we are looking forward to the challenges that this season will provide. We're looking forward to getting back out in the field, and it's been a tremendous effort from everyone to make sure that we are prepared. We're doing this as safely as possible for our players and staff members, and ultimately hoping that this will be a successful campaign for the sport. Since this crisis started, dating back to spring training, I'm personally very proud of the way that the organization has conducted itself. We've been very careful and deliberate with our moves, prioritizing the safety of our players and employees, and that's been reflected in the way that we stage the end of spring training, and also now as we look to resume activities in the major leagues, we're taking the same approach, and I think it has been a wise one, and as a result, so far, our organization has remained very healthy, and we're hoping to continue to do that as best we can, but we know that not everything's inside our control. In particular, I personally would compliment very highly the partnership group and the Angelos family for so many commitments that have been made to paying our minor league players through the end of the season, to the incredible efforts that continue to be made to take care of employees under the most challenging circumstances that this business has ever seen. And I know that I speak for a lot of people that we're all very proud with the way that the Orioles have navigated this and continue to try to navigate what's been very challenging. So we're looking forward to getting back to baseball. We're working right now to make sure that's as smooth as possible, and we'll see how this goes and what the future holds for us. But I know everyone's so excited to see one another again.
Thanks, Mike. We'll start with questions from Rock Abaco, MASNsports.com, followed by John Mioli. Rock?
Hey, Mike. So at this point, do you expect everyone to participate in the camp, players and staff, and nobody to opt out? And also, is there any level of concern at all about whether you'll be able to get in a full 60 games and then postseason?
Regarding participation from staff and players, we recognize that this will be fluid. And everyone is having to make personal decisions, and circumstances might not be fully understood until the season starts. But so far, we are expecting full participation. But you see, in the news around the league that's not the case everywhere. And I wouldn't be shocked if that ends up happening. But that's that's going to be a part of this.
Next, John Mioli.
I'm sorry, getting through the season, Rock. Look, Major League Baseball has taken an incredible amount of time, effort, and care to script out the most or the highest quality protocols that they could. We consulted experts, consulted governments. We've got all types of planning going into this. But that said, no one has ever done this before. You can't plan perfectly for anything, let alone something that has never been experienced. And I imagine things will evolve. It won't go perfectly, but we all recognize this is important, not just to us, but to fans, to the country. We want to try to make this work, and I think we're all staying optimistic within reason, and we're going to do our best to get to the playoffs and have a successful World Series.
John Mioli, Baltimore Sun, followed by Dan Connolly. John?
Hey, Mike, is there anything you could share at this point about whether it's protocols, procedures at Camden Yards that you guys might be putting in that are above or beyond what the league is going to be instituting for the players and staff?
Not really anything particular to share at this moment. I would emphasize, however, that we are taking care to execute the league's protocols to the fullest. Make sure that any amount of planning or care that is not only required but suggested or prudent that we're being sure to take. We take this very seriously. We have from the start. I think that the state of Maryland has had a similar approach, and we certainly don't want to stop that now.
Dan Connolly, The Athletic, followed by Joe Trezza. Dan?
Hey, Mike, there are 44 members of your 60-man pool at this point. When are you going to fill those other 16? And obviously there haven't been a lot of prospects or people that we look as prospects in that group. Do you expect those to be added as well?
So you look at what other teams are doing. I think everyone's approaching this a little bit differently. The way that we have analyzed the rules are that it's easier to add people than take them off of that 60, especially certain types of people. A young prospect, a young minor leaguer who we would get here more for player development purposes cannot be removed from that list unless you release them. And certainly we don't want to get into a situation where we would even consider something like that, or that their presence might otherwise cause us to release or waive someone that we didn't want to otherwise. So we're being very cautious about fleshing out that list. We don't need to do it right now. Obviously, we're going to get to 60 and use our full 60. But we want to wait, get into Camden Yards, see what this looks like, see how our schedule is unfolding, and we will fill out that 60 over time. Also, the players that are competing for opening day roster spots, which everyone on that initial 44-man roster is, they're going to need every bit of time during what's going to be a very quick 3-week spring training anyway to get physically ready for the season, and also for us to make a couple of hard decisions at the bottom of the roster. And the guys that have no realistic shot to make the opening day team, obviously they've got the luxury of more time. So there's just no rush to get them up here. We want to get them up here. Everyone wants to get as many players from our organization as we can up here. But we've got to be smart about the uncertain nature of what this is going to look like for the first week or two. And then also the fact that the rules are kind of a one-way street.
Next, Joe Trezza, MLB.com, followed by Rich Dubroff. Joe?
Hey, Mike, how's it going? I was wondering if you guys have plans for there to be kind of like a satellite camp for those prospects at some point at one of the affiliates, and if so, if that location has been decided upon yet, and also what is going to be kind of the player development equation that or calculus that you have to consider when you're deciding which of those guys might eventually be added later in the summer?
So we will have a second site. It will open at some point during the quote unquote spring training period of time. Not ready to specifically announce when that will open and which exact site it will be. We're very fortunate that we have multiple local professional affiliate options, right in the neighborhood here. So, we're going to be in good shape wherever it is. But we will be utilizing that. I do expect that we will have players here from the low minors that realistically otherwise wouldn't have had a chance to come participate at the high minor league or major league level this year that will be here primarily for player development purposes. Logic would dictate it'll be some of our top prospects, but we've also got a lot of prospects that perhaps aren't publicly ranked as highly, but they're more proximal, the closer to the major leagues, and we need to get them ready for eventual or possible major league debuts this year. So it's going to be kind of a sliding scale between who you are and how close you are to the big leagues, but then also filling out depth for the major league team this year. So there's a lot of considerations, and it just makes it a big case-by-case, person-by-person decision. And it's been an extensive conversation. So we have kind of a game plan, but as I was saying earlier, we're not going to lock ourselves in with announcing all 60 players until it makes sense to do so.
Rich Dubroff, BaltimoreBaseball.com, followed by Steve Molesky. Rich?
Mike, you're used to judging players, teams, coaches, managers over 162 games. What challenges in judging players, coaches, teams, managers over 60 games will that present for you?
Yeah, hadn't really thought about that until recently, and it's going to be a very small sample for these players. I think we're in terms of evaluating our talent based on what happens this year, we're going to be probably more reliant on objective criteria that are not statistical samples that could be misleading in this short of a time. We're going to be looking at guys' stuff, the type of shape they're in, how they're playing defense, how hard they're hitting the ball, all that. But it is very possible that somebody has a pretty misleading stat line over 60 games that they wouldn't have had over 162. So it's just one of the many challenges of this season. There are so many. It's hard to think of them all, and that's just one of them. And I imagine we're going to have to make some personnel decisions at the end of the year, like we do every year. And we're only working with a third of the info that we're accustomed to.
Steve Molesky, MASNsports.com, followed by Mark Viviano. Steve?
Mike, what is your analysis or best guess right now as a possibility of games for minor league players beyond just intra-squad? And does that impact decisions you're making on the 60-player pool? In other words, if you find out later someone could have 30 games they could play in somewhere, when Arizona Fall League or Florida Fall League, would you prefer that than be on a player pool where you might not want to put them in a major league game?
Yeah, I don't know whether players will be playing in quote-unquote real minor league games this year or not right now. I don't think anyone does. You see the effort that's going into standing up a major league season, and it's not a small one. And I know that it's something that once the league gets Major League Baseball into a spot where they feel like things are up and running and rolling, they're going to immediately turn their attention to the minors. And we all want to get something for those kids, get something for minor league baseball. So we're going to stay hopeful. But at this point, we're operating with a lot of uncertainty in that front. It will motivate us to try to get some guys up here into the 60 just to make sure that they get an experience this year and get some activity. But yes, if plans for minor league baseball this summer, this fall, this winter, or player development activities this summer, this fall, this winter, if they start to crystallize and look likely, it would reduce some of that pressure later in this season. But I just don't think we're going to have that info too soon. So we've got to kind of assume that this is our best shot to getting these guys some action.
Next up, Mark Viviano, WJZ, followed by Jerry Coleman. Mark?
Hey, Mike, you've been upfront about the mission all along, rebuilding a franchise, developing players, but here you go into a 60-game season, which is so unusual, and a good team could struggle, and a rebuilding team could be better than anyone could expect over 60 games. How do you look at that possibility in terms of maybe being more competitive than you might be in 162? Does it change anything about what you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I think it's going to be kind of fun. I mean, it'll be interesting. I think it's going to fly by. I think playing the National League East a lot is going to be interesting. I didn't think that our strength of schedule, being an American League East team, could get any tougher, but it actually did. We do have the toughest strength of schedule this year, so it's not going to be an easy road. But I do think it makes things a little less predictable. The fact that the pitchers may not be totally built up at the beginning of the year, and you get some extra roster spots and some more pitching changes, maybe that helps us, maybe that doesn't, but I think it creates a little uncertainty. And I think our goal is just to be a kind of an unpredictable young team that's scary to play in these circumstances, and that we mix things up. We are out our best player from last year, and that's tough. It's a big blow, and we're going to miss him. But I think that we got a bunch of guys that are playing out there with their careers on the line, and they play hard, and it's going to be unpredictable and interesting.
Next, Jerry Coleman, 105.7 The Fan, followed by Chris Marks. Jerry?
Hey, Mike, I was listening to you talk about the health and safety briefly. I saw a memo from MLB today. Is there any renovations or anything that needs to transpire with the clubhouse to get in accordance? Also, I didn't see anything about, I know there had been a lot of discussion about players not being able to shower at the ballpark. Is that still a possibility? And the last part is travel arrangements. When might they be determined? Will it solely be by bus?
Yeah, there's been a lot of work, both in terms of planning and physically moving stuff in the clubhouses to create more distance. There will be fewer players in the clubhouses, and we're using a lot of auxiliary rooms and rooms, different parts of the stadium to accommodate that. But the goal is to create a more spacious atmosphere inside the clubhouse, and it's something that everyone's taking real seriously. They did change the initial guideline about not showering in the clubhouse, so there will be showering permitted, but people are going to be very careful about that. And again, there are protocols affecting that, and all kinds of issues that you wouldn't even have thought of, but that MLB's gotten ahead of. What was your third question?
Travel.
Yeah, we won't be solely bus. We're going to Florida a bunch. We'll be playing Atlanta this year. We'll be playing in Boston, so it's not an option to do it that way. They're again, it's not ordinary travel. There's more safety precautions. The way that the players and staff behave when they're on the plane or on the bus, who's on the plane, on the bus, how many people. All kinds of stuff. So it's going to be a totally different experience. I think it's going to be a little, taxing in a lot of ways for these players. They're not going to be able to fully relax and revert to the habits that they're used to while they're traveling. But I think we'll get used to it, and everyone is really committed to making this work and understanding the importance of successfully getting through this baseball season, and that's going to be a big part of it is our travel.
Next, Chris Marks, CTV, followed by Pete Gilbert. Chris?
Mike, given the fact that there may or may not be minor league season, you're going to have 60 men on the roster. If someone goes down, you have to get somebody back in. How are you going to keep them game ready? For instance, how are you going to keep pitchers on a schedule? How are you going to keep these guys who aren't playing in the games game ready so they can step right in and play?
So we'll have, we don't have Norfolk as our AAA this year because of the setup, but we will still have the ability to option people down. They will go to our second site, and it's not just going to be practice. We're going to have simulated games so that pitchers can throw innings and hitters can get live at bats. I'm sure we'll figure out a way to simulate, game environment as best as possible. But the pitchers would be able to log their innings and keep on a real inning schedule, which I think is the most important aspect of that.
Pete Gilbert, WBAL, followed by Nathan Ruiz. Pete?
Hey, Mike. Piggybacking a little bit about what Mark Viviano was asking, if you guys get off to a start that is, a really good start, and say, 40 games in or 35 games in, you're in contention to make the playoffs, will that change the way you maybe would have approached in terms of roster building? Or is it just, look, that would be nice and that'd be great, but the big focus still has to remain, the rebuild that you guys are undertaking? And also, would rule change, or have any rule changes affected the way you're looking to construct the roster?
The biggest rule change is that the early weeks of the season will be more players on the roster. They've relaxed the recent rule change that was going to limit how many pitchers you can carry. So they're just trying to put a little less stress on the pitchers early in the season because spring training is going to be so short. And I think that'll help everyone, and particularly us, where we've got not a lot of established pitchers cemented on our roster. So that should be helpful. Yeah, look, if we get into the season and we're surprising people and we're playing well and our record's good, I think it would be a lot of fun. I think that we still have a lot of work to do in this organization to set it up consistently, healthfully for the future. It was a multi-years effort when it started, and it will continue to be a multi-year effort. We're making progress there, even in spite of the curveball that this year has thrown at us. And so we're keeping that in our sights. But if we have a chance to make the playoffs this year, we'll be happy about it, and we're gonna look at that very seriously if that's the position that we're in.
Nathan Ruiz, Baltimore Sun, followed by Mel Antonin. Nathan?
Hey, Mike, thanks for doing this. Last year, you guys used almost 60 players as it was. Do you expect, given how much of that was kind of the result of the waiver wire system, that some of your roster moves in that way will change over the course of this year, just given the nationwide circumstances?
I don't know. The waiver wire still exists. Those transactions and those rules have not been altered. And I don't know if there's going to be less waiver activity given the circumstances and sort of the difficulty of offboarding and onboarding players. But I think that the league's planning and the other GMs are proceeding with the expectation that it won't be much different. Teams are going to have to do things. Players get hurt. There are all types of transactions that you just can't avoid over the course of the season. And this is why we're taking every care to make things as safe as possible, knowing that baseball is going to have to conduct its business, like it or not, even with the incredible circumstances. So we'll just have to see. There's a lot of things that are hard to predict about what's going to be different this year, and that's one of them.
Next, Mel Antonin MASN, followed by Sean Stepner. Welcome back, Mel.
Thank you. Hey, Mike, given that you're a developing team all the way through your system, who hurts the most as far as learning curves? Pitching, defense, hitting? What's the biggest concern as far as development, as far as players not making the right steps or making the steps forward?
Yeah, good to see you, Mel.
Thank you.
I think that the two areas that are most concerning on the development front are for the pitchers. It's physically, it's logging the innings, getting the experience of throwing 30 pitch innings under stress, working out of jams, getting up and down in the bullpen if you're a reliever. Just the physical development of being a pitcher in the minor leagues. This is obviously curtailing, and they're all in a more controlled environment and unable to. We're going to try the best we can to replicate that experience, but it's not going to be the same. For hitters, I worry the most about our young hitters, the teenage guys that we've got, even the young college kids that we just drafted. These are really key at bats, in their kind of life cycle as a baseball player, seeing 90 miles an hour plus for the first time every day, day in and day out, seeing professional breaking balls, sliders, change-ups for the first time. You can imagine that and missing out on that experience when you're 19 years old. I don't know how you replace that, but as I keep coming back to, everyone's in the same boat. So their whole generation of players is going to be affected by this equally, and it just is what it is.
Next, Sean Stepner, WMAR, followed by Dan Connolly. Sean?
Hey, Mike, hope you're well. So can you take us through how this is going to look when players start arriving, where they'll go, how staggered it'll be as far as numbers of players are concerned, and kind of what that first, time on the field is going to look like? What is it, Friday, right?
Yeah. So Brandon Hyde and Tim Cousins have been working on that, and they have it all mapped out. And last thing I want to do is meddle in the daily schedule for something as chaotic as this. Not my area of expertise to begin with, but I know those guys have been looking at it and thinking about it from a whole number of angles, the whole coaching staff. So we've got a plan for that. So the pitchers get in their work, the hitters get in their work, especially in the first few days of the spring training before we start doing a live game experience. I think we will utilize a really large portion of the day, especially early, so that it is staggered, so that we don't have 44 guys in Camden all at once. And then ultimately, when we get our second site open, when we start to shrink the team a little bit, it might start to look a little bit more like a traditional two-team inter-squad type setup. But we're having to be very mindful of that. It's a cozy building to begin with, and we're not going to be able to just have everyone there and everyone kind of hanging out. There's going to have to be real scripted plans for who's working where when. So it's a big effort.
Next, Dan Connolly, The Athletic, followed by Joe Trezza. Dan?
Yeah, Mike, just two follow-up questions, kind of points of clarification. You of the 44-man pool, you had said they'd be competing for the opening day roster. Those who are not in that pool right now, maybe guys like a Mountcastle, an Aiken, a Zimmerman, and maybe a Mason Williams, are they no longer considered possibilities for the 30-man roster for the opening day roster? Can they still be considered? Where do you sit on that? And also, you had mentioned that the organization has been kept very healthy at this point. In April, you said there had been no players or staff members testing positive for COVID-19. Has that changed? Have you had any members of your staff or players test positive for COVID-19?
So on your first question, some of the players that you mentioned were optioned out of spring training. Mountcastle, Aiken, some other guys, Dean Kramer. So nothing has really changed for them. I mean, obviously we could get into spring training, something changes, some injuries occur, we revisit it, but we're kind of reverting to the status quo of the end of spring training there. There were players, Bruce Zimmerman and Mason Williams, at least so far in his case, that were not included on that 44-man that had technically been in camp at the end of camp when it abruptly ended. And looking at things and trying to keep these numbers tight as much as possible in this very early period, as I said, when we only have one facility open, and when we're just kind of unsure of how the day is going to go, and we don't want to overwhelm ourselves with numbers, given that we can add at any time, that we did shift out for right now. But we'll just see how the camp goes. I think some of those guys, there's a scenario where they do creep into it, and especially if there are injuries and they make the opening game team. Others probably not, but we expect to see them potentially later this year. And then regarding COVID tests, yeah, we have not had any big news on that front, knock on wood. We did early in the process had a young international player where there were some signs and indications that he may be a positive case, but never had adverse health effects. And we monitored it and saw to its resolution, and he's totally fine. And it was a situation that occurred overseas. But other than that, we've been remarkably lucky thus far. I don't expect that to continue throughout the season. We're going to have cases. That's been the expectation for Major League Baseball all along. And we're going to do the best we can to be prepared for it, to contain any situations that occur, to keep everyone healthy, even when they do test positive, and try to have the best outcomes we can. But we all know that we're heading into a situation that is not without its pitfalls, and we're going to do the best we can.
Next, Joe Trezza, MLB.com, followed by John Mioli. Joe?
Hey, Mike, a little while ago you mentioned the 2020 draft picks, the 6 players you guys drafted earlier this month. Is there a scenario where some of those guys find themselves in a camp situation later this summer? And is it going to be a one-size-fits-all thing or individual plans for those guys?
Yeah, possibly. We're going to tell everyone to stay ready, and we're going to hope to get as many young players from the lower levels of our organization involved as we possibly can. And we think that those opportunities might become more plentiful the deeper we get into the season, but we'll just have to see. So I wouldn't rule out 2020 draft picks at all, but I don't think it's going to be something that's instantaneous.
Reminder to everybody, if you have a question, please enter your name and affiliation in the chat box. Next up, John Mioli, Baltimore Sun. John?
Mike, at the beginning you mentioned that you understood, even though no one had opted out of the season at this point, you understood that was a consideration players and coaches might need to make, with their families as this goes on. How would you guys handle that in terms of pay, service time, stuff like that, if somebody does decide not to participate?
So it's not our determination. There are rules governing it that have been bargained between MLB and the MLBPA back in March, and I think even there's been some recent adjustments to that from the last agreement before we got the go ahead. So obviously we're going to follow those, but this is everyone who's coming really wants to be here and come. And our approach is that, this is an unusual situation. Everybody's got their own circumstances. We're not pressuring anyone or shaming anyone that feels they shouldn't be here. And, we're making that known, and I think it's well received. And so far no one has decided not to come, but we'll see how it goes. And but so far everyone's just raring to go. And I know our players have been itching to play for a while. I think the whole delay was frustrating for them, for us, and everyone just wants to go play.
Next question, Mel Antonin, MASN. Mel? Hang on one sec, Mel. We'll unmute you.
Okay, one more question from me. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Is the catcher, because he's stationed ahead of the umpire and behind the batter, is he in any more danger than any other player, given his position on the team, on the field defensively?
I don't know the answer to that. I think we're hoping that if you're out on the field itself, that there's not too much opportunity for somebody to spread. But again, this is not a precedented situation. It's not it's been an enigmatic virus since we started dealing with it, and we're just gonna have to be prepared for anything. But I'm hoping that the guys will be safe as they can be while they're on the field.
Any other questions? Last call. All right. Well, thank you for your time tonight, Mike, and thank you